Rebecca Martinez had been a registered nurse for 12 years, and she'd learned to trust her instincts. In the chaotic world of emergency medicine, intuition often meant the difference between catching something critical and missing it entirely. It was 2:47 a.m. on a Wednesday night at St. Mary's Hospital in Denver when they brought in Amy Reynolds. 16 years old, multiple contusions, possible concussion, fractured wrist. The paramedics said it was a car accident, single vehicle, rolled into a ditch on a rural road outside the city. Rebecca took one look at the girl and knew something was wrong. Amy's injuries didn't match the story. The bruises on her arms were in different stages of healing, some fresh, some days old, some turning that yellowish green of week-old trauma. The fracture in her wrist had a distinctive pattern that Rebecca recognized from her years in the ER. That wasn't from a car accident. That was a defensive wound. "Amy," Rebecca said gently, checking the girl's vitals, "can you tell me what happened?" Amy's eyes darted toward the waiting room, where a well-dressed man in his early 40s paced back and forth, his phone pressed to his ear. "It was a car accident," she said, her voice flat and rehearsed. "I lost control of the car. It was raining." Rebecca glanced at the admission form. The man in the waiting room was Marcus Reynolds, listed as Amy's father. He'd ridden in the ambulance with her, insisting on staying close. "It wasn't raining tonight," Rebecca said carefully, watching Amy's reaction. The girl's eyes widened slightly, a flash of panic quickly suppressed. "I mean, it was wet. The roads were wet. From earlier." Rebecca didn't push it. Not yet, but she made a mental note and continued her assessment. Amy's physical injuries were concerning enough. The bruises, the fracture, a cut above her eyebrow that had been crudely cleaned. But what worried Rebecca more were the psychological signs. The way Amy flinched when Rebecca touched her arm. The way her eyes kept tracking to the waiting room. The tremor in her voice that had nothing to do with pain. Rebecca had seen this before, too many times. "Amy, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me," Rebecca said quietly, positioning herself so Amy's father couldn't see them from the waiting room. "Are you safe at home?" Amy's face went blank. "I'm fine. It was just an accident." "The bruises on your arms," Rebecca pressed gently. "Some of them are old. Were they from other accidents?" "I'm clumsy," Amy said, the response too quick, too practiced. "I fall a lot. Play sports. You know how it is." Rebecca knew how it wasn't, but she also knew that victims of abuse rarely admitted it on the first conversation, especially with their abuser nearby. "Okay," Rebecca said, backing off. "I'm going to get the doctor to check you out, and we'll get some x-rays of that wrist. If you need anything at all, you just press this button, okay?" Amy nodded, but her eyes were hollow. Rebecca stepped out of the examination room and nearly collided with Marcus Reynolds. "How is she?" he demanded, his voice carrying that edge of authority that came from being used to getting his way. "I need to know what's happening with my daughter." "She's stable," Rebecca said professionally. "The doctor will be in shortly to assess her injuries." "I want to be in there with her," Marcus said, moving toward the door. Rebecca stepped smoothly into his path. "Hospital policy for examinations, Mr. Reynolds. The doctor needs to assess her privately first, then family can come in." It wasn't actually policy, but Marcus didn't need to know that. His eyes narrowed, and for just a moment, Rebecca saw something cold and calculating behind the concerned father facade. Then it was gone, replaced by worried charm. "Of course," he said smoothly. "I understand. I'll just wait here. But please, let me know immediately if there's anything serious. Amy is everything to me." The words were right. The tone was right. But something about the way he said, "Amy is everything to me," made Rebecca's skin crawl. She walked to the nurse's station and pulled up Amy's medical records. What she found confirmed her suspicions. This was Amy's 4th ER visit in the past 18 months. Each time for accidents, a fall downstairs, a bicycle crash, a sports injury. Each time, Marcus Reynolds had been the one to bring her in. Each time, the injuries were documented, treated, and dismissed, but no one had connected the dots. Rebecca looked at the pattern of injuries, the frequency of visits, the defensive wounds masked as accidents. She thought about Amy's hollow eyes and practiced responses. She thought about Marcus Reynolds' too smooth concern and the flash of coldness she'd seen, and she made a decision. She picked up the phone and called security. "You think the father is abusing her?" The hospital security officer, Tom Chen, looked skeptical as he reviewed Amy's file. "I know he is," Rebecca said firmly. "Look at the pattern. 4 ER visits in 18 months. All accidents. All with injuries consistent with physical abuse. The defensive fracture. The multiple stage bruising. The psychological signs." "But she denied it," Tom pointed out. "And he's her legal guardian. We can't just accuse him without proof." "I'm not asking you to accuse him," Rebecca said. "I'm asking you to help me protect her. Keep him away from her room while I do a thorough assessment. If she feels safe, she might open up." Tom hesitated, then nodded. I'll station myself outside her room. But Rebecca, if you're wrong about this, I'm not wrong, Rebecca said with a conviction she felt in her bones. She returned to Amy's room. The girl was staring at the ceiling, tears silently streaming down her face. Amy, Rebecca said gently, closing the door behind her. Your father can't hear us right now. And I need you to know something. Whatever you tell me stays between us unless you give me permission to share it. Doctor-patient confidentiality. Do you understand? Amy's eyes met Rebecca's, and something in them broke. He'll kill me if I tell you. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Rebecca sat down next to the bed, her voice calm and steady despite the rage building in her chest. Amy, I've been a nurse for 12 years. I've seen a lot of things. And I know abuse when I see it. The question isn't whether I believe you. I do. The question is whether you're ready to let me help you. You don't understand, Amy whispered. He's not just my dad. He's Marcus Reynolds. He's a defense attorney. He knows the law. He knows how to make things look legal. He knows how to make me look crazy if I say anything. Rebecca's blood ran cold. A defense attorney, someone who understood the legal system intimately and could manipulate it. Someone with resources and connections. Someone who would know exactly how to intimidate his daughter into silence. Tell me what happened tonight, Rebecca said. The truth. Amy closed her eyes, tears flowing freely now. We got into a fight. I told him I wanted to live with my mom. They're divorced, and she lives in California. He grabbed my wrist and twisted it until I heard it crack. Then he shoved me, and I hit my head on the kitchen counter. She opened her eyes, looking at Rebecca with desperate hope mixed with terror. He told me we were going to the hospital, and I was going to say it was a car accident. He said if I told anyone the truth, he'd make sure I never saw my mom again. He said he'd have her arrested for kidnapping if she tried to take me. He said no one would believe me anyway, because he's a respected attorney, and I'm just a troubled teen. You're not a troubled teen, Rebecca said firmly. You're a survivor, and I believe you. But I need you to trust me enough to let me involve people who can help. Can you do that? Amy hesitated for a long moment. Then she nodded, just barely. Rebecca squeezed her hand. Okay, I'm going to call the police and social services. Your father is not going to hurt you again. I promise you that. When Detective James Wilson arrived at St. Mary's Hospital 45 minutes later, Marcus Reynolds was still in the waiting room, his veneer of worried father concern starting to crack. What's taking so long? He demanded of the receptionist. I want to see my daughter. This is ridiculous. Mr. Reynolds, Detective Wilson approached, his badge visible. I'm Detective Wilson with the Denver Police Department. I need to ask you some questions about tonight's incident. Marcus's face went through a rapid series of expressions: surprise, calculation, then smooth confidence. Of course, detective, though I'm not sure what questions you'd have. It was a simple car accident. My daughter lost control of the vehicle. Can you walk me through what happened? Wilson asked, pulling out a notepad. Certainly. Amy called me around 2 a.m. She was upset, said she'd crashed the car. I drove out to where she was, about 20 miles outside the city on Route 36. Found her car in a ditch. She was conscious but dazed. I called 911, and we came here. Route 36, Wilson repeated. That's interesting, because the paramedics report says they picked her up from your home address in Cherry Creek. No mention of a car accident site. Marcus's confident expression flickered. That must be a mistake in the paperwork. We definitely came from the accident site. We'll verify that, Wilson said. Mr. Reynolds, can you explain why your daughter has bruises in various stages of healing? Bruises that predate tonight's accident. She plays soccer, Marcus said smoothly. Very active girl, always getting hurt. I've told her to be more careful, but you know teenagers. Actually, according to her school records, Amy doesn't play any sports, Wilson said. She's in the drama club and student government. No athletic activities. Marcus's jaw tightened. Look, detective, I don't appreciate the insinuation. My daughter was in an accident. I brought her to get medical care. I'm not sure why I'm being interrogated. Because your daughter told our nurse a very different story, Wilson said, watching Marcus's reaction carefully. She said you broke her wrist during an argument. She said you've been physically abusing her for years. She said you threatened her into lying about tonight. For just a moment, Marcus's mask slipped completely. Rebecca, watching from the nurse's station, saw pure rage flash across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by wounded indignation. That's absurd, Marcus said. My daughter is troubled. She's been in therapy for behavioral issues. She makes up stories for attention. This is exactly the kind of manipulation her therapist warned me about. Convenient, Wilson said. Do you have documentation of these therapy sessions? Of course. Marcus pulled out his phone. I can provide the therapist's contact information. Dr. Sarah Chen. She's been seeing Amy for 6 months. Wilson made a note. We'll be in touch with Dr. Chen. In the meantime, Mr. Reynolds, I need you to understand something. We have a minor patient who has made serious allegations of abuse. Until we complete our investigation, you will not be allowed unsupervised contact with your daughter. You can't do that, Marcus said, his voice rising. I'm her father. I have legal custody. You're violating my parental rights. Actually, Wilson said calmly, under Colorado law, when there are credible allegations of child abuse, we can implement emergency protective measures. A social worker from Child Protective Services
Martinez is on her way. She'll be interviewing Amy, and we'll be conducting a full investigation. Marcus's face went red. I'm an attorney, detective. I know my rights, and I know my daughter's rights. This is harassment based on the word of a disturbed teenager. I will be filing complaints against everyone involved in this witch hunt. That's your prerogative, Wilson said. But until our investigation is complete, you're not seeing Amy alone. Now I need you to answer some more questions. While Detective Wilson interrogated Marcus in the waiting room, Rebecca stayed with Amy. The girl had stopped crying but was shaking uncontrollably. What if he's right? Amy whispered. What if no one believes me? What if they send me back to him? They won't, Rebecca said firmly. Amy, I've seen your medical records. 4 ER visits in 18 months, all suspicious injuries, all with your father present. That's a pattern. Add that to your testimony, and they have to investigate. But he's so good at this, Amy said desperately. He's been doing it for years, and no one ever noticed. No one ever asked questions. Why would they start now? Because I'm asking questions, Rebecca thought. Because I refuse to look away. Tell me about the other times, Rebecca said gently. The other ER visits. What really happened? Amy took a shuddering breath. The stairs. He pushed me down them because I got a B on a test. The bicycle accident. He hit me with a chair and told the doctors I crashed my bike. The sports injury. He slammed my hand in a car door because I talked back to him. Each revelation made Rebecca's stomach turn. How had no one caught this? How had Amy slipped through the cracks so many times? Did you ever try to tell anyone? Rebecca asked. Once, Amy said quietly. I told a school counselor last year. She called my dad in for a meeting. He was so charming, so concerned. He told her I'd been making up stories since my parents' divorce, that I was angry at him for getting custody. He brought in a letter from Dr. Chen confirming I had adjustment disorder with mixed anxiety and depressed mood, and a tendency toward dramatic exaggeration. Amy's voice broke. The counselor believed him. She told me I needed to stop seeking attention in unhealthy ways. She said I was lucky to have such a caring father. After that, I knew no one would ever believe me. I believe you, Rebecca said. And Detective Wilson believes you. And CPS will believe you. This time, Amy, you're being heard. There was a knock on the door. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a professional demeanor entered. Amy, I'm Linda Morrison from Child Protective Services. I'm here to help you. Over the next hour, Linda conducted a careful interview with Amy, documenting everything. Rebecca stayed in the room at Amy's request, providing both physical and emotional support. Amy told her story. Years of escalating abuse that started after her parents' divorce when she was 12. Her mother had wanted custody but couldn't afford the legal battle against a wealthy attorney. Marcus had won custody through a combination of legal maneuvering and character assassination. He'd portrayed Amy's mother as unstable and himself as the responsible parent. Once he had custody, the abuse began. It started with verbal attacks and emotional manipulation, then escalated to physical violence. He was careful never to leave marks that couldn't be explained away. He coached Amy on what to say to doctors and therapists. He isolated her from friends who might ask questions. He threatened her with losing all contact with her mother if she ever told the truth. He said the courts would never give me to her. Amy explained to Linda. He said he'd prove she was an unfit parent, that I'd end up in foster care, that I'd never see her again. He said it was better to just accept how things were. Amy, Linda said gently, your mother doesn't know about the abuse? Amy shook her head. He monitors all our calls and messages. I couldn't tell her. And she lives in California. She only gets to see me twice a year, supervised visits that he controls. She doesn't know. Linda made notes. We'll need to contact her. She has a right to know what's happening. And Amy, I want you to understand. You're not going back to your father's house. Not tonight. Not until we complete our investigation. You're going to be placed in protective custody. Where? Amy asked, fear creeping into her voice. We have a safe house for situations like this, Linda explained. It's comfortable, secure, and temporary. We'll work quickly to find a more permanent solution. Hopefully with your mother, if that's what you want, and if she's able to take custody. Amy started crying again, but this time it was relief. I want my mom. I just want my mom. The next 24 hours were a whirlwind. Detective Wilson obtained a warrant to search Marcus Reynolds' home, where they found evidence of his abuse, holes punched in walls, bloodstains on carpet that had been cleaned but not removed, and most damning, a journal Amy had hidden in her room documenting years of abuse. Marcus's therapist, Dr. Chen, was interviewed. She admitted under questioning that Marcus had specifically sought her out and essentially dictated the diagnosis he wanted for Amy. He told me she was a difficult child who made up stories, Dr. Chen said, clearly shaken. He was so professional, so credible. I accepted his characterization without doing my own independent assessment. I failed that girl. Amy's mother, Catherine Reynolds, flew in from California the moment she was notified. The reunion in the hospital was heartbreaking. Catherine sobbing, Amy clinging to her, both of them trying to process years of separation and trauma. I knew something was wrong, Catherine told Detective Wilson through her tears. The supervised visits were so strange. Amy was withdrawn, scared to talk freely. But Marcus always had an explanation. He said she was struggling with the divorce, that she needed stability, that my visits upset her routine. I believed him because he was the lawyer, the one who understood the system. She looked at her daughter with anguish. I should have fought harder. I should have known. He's a master manipulator, Wilson said. He used his legal knowledge and his position of authority to gaslight everyone. You, the therapists, the school counselors, even the ER doctors who treated Amy. But Rebecca Martinez saw through it. Catherine found Rebecca at the nurse's station. "I don't have words to thank you," she said, gripping Rebecca's hands. "You saved my daughter's life. You gave her back to me." Rebecca felt tears in her own eyes. "I just paid attention. That's all. I just listened when she needed someone to hear her." But the legal battle was just beginning. Marcus Reynolds hired a team of expensive lawyers and fought the CPS investigation with every tool at his disposal. He claimed the allegations were fabricated. He questioned the validity of the evidence. He attacked Amy's credibility and Catherine's fitness as a parent. The custody hearing was brutal. Marcus's lawyers painted Amy as a troubled teen manipulating the system. They brought in character witnesses testifying to Marcus's reputation as a respected attorney and community member. They argued that Rebecca had overstepped her authority and planted ideas in a vulnerable minor's mind, but they couldn't explain away the medical evidence, the pattern of injuries, the journal entries, the testimony of Dr. Chen acknowledging she'd failed to do proper due diligence. And most powerfully, Amy herself testified. "He broke my wrist because I wanted to live with my mom," Amy said, her voice steady despite her tears. "He's broken a lot of things over the years, my bones, my confidence, my sense of safety. But he couldn't break my will to survive. And when Nurse Martinez asked if I was safe, I finally had someone who wouldn't let him manipulate the truth away." The judge took less than an hour to rule. Full custody to Catherine Reynolds, a restraining order preventing Marcus from having any contact with Amy, and a referral to the district attorney's office for criminal charges. Marcus Reynolds was arrested as he left the courthouse, charged with multiple counts of child abuse, assault, and witness intimidation. The case made headlines. Prominent Denver attorney arrested for child abuse. The legal community was shocked. Colleagues who had worked with Marcus for years struggled to reconcile the charming professional man they knew with the monster who had terrorized his daughter. But for Rebecca, the real impact was more personal. She started noticing patterns she'd missed before, not just with Amy, but with other patients. The woman with repetitive fall injuries, whose husband was always present and always had an explanation. The elderly man with unexplained bruises, whose adult daughter managed all his medical care. The teenage boy with sports injuries that didn't match his athletic activities. Once Rebecca knew what to look for, she couldn't unsee it. She approached the hospital administration with a proposal: mandatory training for all ER staff on recognizing signs of abuse. Not just the obvious cases, but the subtle ones, the patterns, the inconsistencies, the red flags that were easy to dismiss if you weren't paying attention. "We failed Amy Reynolds 4 times, Rebecca told the chief of medicine at a staff meeting. 4 times she came through our ER with injuries consistent with abuse, and 4 times we documented, treated, and released her back to her abuser. We can't let that happen again." The hospital implemented her training program. Within 6 months, staff members had identified and reported 23 cases of suspected abuse that likely would have gone unnoticed before. Each report led to investigations. Each investigation potentially saved a life. Rebecca also worked with Detective Wilson to develop better protocols for police response to abuse allegations. Too many times, Wilson explained, credible reports were dismissed because the abuser was charismatic, wealthy, or had a good reputation. Marcus Reynolds was respected in the legal community, Wilson said at a joint training session with hospital staff and police officers. That respect became armor that protected him from scrutiny. "We have to train ourselves to look past social status and professional reputation when evaluating abuse allegations. The evidence matters, not the alleged abuser's standing in the community." The protocols they developed emphasized thorough investigation regardless of the accused person's background, better coordination between medical professionals and law enforcement, and trauma-informed interviewing techniques for victims. 6 months after the custody hearing, Amy was thriving in California with her mother. She was in therapy, processing years of trauma. She joined the drama club at her new school and was making friends for the first time in years. Catherine sent Rebecca regular updates. Photos of Amy smiling, genuinely smiling, not the forced frightened expression she'd worn in Denver. Stories about Amy's progress in therapy, her improving grades, her growing confidence. "She talks about you all the time," Catherine wrote in one email. "She calls you her guardian angel. She says when she grows up, she wants to be a nurse like you, someone who pays attention when everyone else looks away." Rebecca kept those emails in a folder on her computer. On hard nights, and there were still hard nights, she'd read them and remember why she'd chosen this profession. Why she'd pushed when it would have been easier to accept the easy explanation. Why she'd trusted her instincts when the safe choice would have been to mind her own business. Amy came back to Denver once for Marcus's criminal trial. She'd been dreading it. The thought of seeing her father again, of having to testify in open court, of reliving the abuse for a jury. Rebecca met them at the airport. Amy, now 17 and noticeably healthier. She'd gained weight, lost the haunted look in her eyes, ran to hug her. "I wouldn't be here without you," Amy said. "Literally. I'd still be with him, still being hurt, still believing no one would ever listen." The trial lasted 2 weeks. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, medical records, Amy's journal, testimony from neighbors who'd heard yelling and crashes from the Reynolds home, forensic evidence from the house search. Marcus's defense tried to paint Amy as a liar, and Rebecca as an overreaching medical professional who had manipulated a vulnerable teen, but the jury saw through it. Marcus Reynolds was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 15 years in prison. When the verdict was read, Amy cried. Not from trauma this time, but from relief. It was finally over. Amy's case was a watershed moment in Denver's approach to child abuse. It exposed how easily sophisticated abusers could manipulate systems designed to protect children. It showed how professional status and social respectability could become shields for predators. It demonstrated the critical importance of medical professionals who were willing to question, to investigate, to advocate. Rebecca became an unexpected advocate for abuse victims. She spoke at medical conferences about recognizing patterns of abuse. She trained hospital staff across Colorado on how to conduct sensitive interviews with potential abuse victims. She worked with legislators to strengthen child protection laws. "I'm just a nurse," she told a reporter who was writing a follow-up story on Amy's case. "I don't have special training in abuse recognition, beyond what any ER nurse receives. What I had was a willingness to trust my instincts and ask uncomfortable questions." The reporter asked what message she had for other medical professionals. Rebecca thought carefully. "Pay attention, really pay attention. Not just to the injuries you're treating, but to the whole picture. Does the story match the injuries? Does the patient seem afraid of their companion? Are there patterns in their medical history? Trust your gut when something feels wrong." She paused. "And most importantly, be willing to act on what you see. It's uncomfortable. It might be wrong. The patient might deny everything. The alleged abuser might be charming and credible. But if you see signs of abuse and do nothing, you're complicit in that abuse continuing. Your discomfort is worth less than someone's safety." The article went viral, shared by medical professionals around the country. Rebecca's inbox filled with messages from nurses and doctors sharing their own stories. Times they'd suspected abuse but didn't report it. Times they'd reported it and saved someone. Times they'd failed to notice and regretted it later. One message particularly moved her. It was from an ER nurse in Seattle. "I read your story and it made me reconsider a case from last month. A woman with injuries she claimed were from a fall. Something felt off, but her husband was so concerned and she insisted she was fine. I let it go. After reading about Amy Reynolds, I pulled her records. 3 previous ER visits in 6 months. All falls. I called CPS. They're investigating now. I don't know if I'm right, but because of your story, I decided being wrong was better than potentially letting abuse continue. Thank you for teaching me to trust my instincts." Rebecca saved that email. It represented what she hoped Amy's story would accomplish, empowering medical professionals to act on suspicions, to prioritize patient safety over their own comfort, to be willing to ask hard questions even when it was awkward or difficult.
2 years after Amy's case, Rebecca faced a situation that tested everything she'd learned. A 12-year-old boy named Daniel came into the ER with a dislocated shoulder. His mother, Patricia, explained he'd been roughhousing with friends and fell wrong. Rebecca's instincts immediately activated. The injury didn't match the story. Daniel was withdrawn and wouldn't make eye contact. Patricia seemed nervous and overly defensive. Rebecca conducted a thorough exam and found bruising patterns consistent with someone grabbing Daniel's arm forcefully. She documented everything and pulled his medical records. 2 previous ER visits in 8 months. Following protocol, Rebecca reported suspected abuse to CPS and informed the police. The investigation revealed the truth, but not what Rebecca expected. Daniel wasn't being abused by his mother. He was being bullied at school by a group of older boys who had been targeting him for months. The roughhousing with friends was actually assault. Patricia knew about the bullying but didn't know how to stop it, and was terrified of making it worse by involving authorities. "I thought if I reported it, the bullies would retaliate harder," Patricia explained tearfully. "I thought I was protecting him by handling it quietly. I didn't realize how bad it had gotten." The school had failed to address the bullying despite multiple complaints. The bullies came from wealthy, influential families. Daniel, from a single-parent household, had been dismissed as exaggerating or being too sensitive. Rebecca felt a complicated mix of emotions. She'd been right that something was wrong, abuse was occurring, but she'd assumed the wrong perpetrator. And yet her report had still helped Daniel by forcing the truth into the open and making the school finally take action. Detective Wilson, now a friend and frequent collaborator, explained, "This is why we investigate instead of assuming. You saw signs of trauma and reported them. That's your job. Our job is to figure out the full picture. You didn't fail Daniel. You helped him by refusing to accept the easy explanation." The incident made Rebecca refine her approach. She still trusted her instincts about when something was wrong, but she learned to hold her theories more lightly, to investigate thoroughly before drawing conclusions, to remember that abuse took many forms and didn't always come from the expected sources. 3 years after Amy's case, Rebecca was invited to speak at a nursing school graduation. Amy was in the audience, now 20, healthy, thriving, studying to become a social worker. "When I started nursing school," Rebecca told the new graduates, "I thought my job was to treat injuries and illnesses. I thought if I was good at the medical side, I'd be a good nurse. But I learned that nursing is about seeing the whole person, not just their symptoms." She told Amy's story, carefully, with permission, protecting details but conveying the essential truth. A girl who came into the ER with injuries that didn't match her story, a nurse who paid attention and refused to look away, a life that was saved because someone cared enough to investigate. Not all of you will work in emergency medicine, Rebecca continued, but all of you will encounter patients who are suffering in ways that aren't visible on an X-ray or a blood test, patients who are being abused, patients who are homeless, patients who are addicted, patients who are afraid. Your job isn't just to treat their medical problems, it's to see them as whole humans and advocate for their well-being. She paused, looking around at the young faces full of idealism and hope. It's not always easy. You'll face situations where you're not sure if your suspicions are right. You'll face patients who deny problems. You'll face systems that don't want to be challenged. You'll face your own discomfort with asking hard questions. Rebecca's voice grew firmer. But I'm here to tell you, trust your instincts, pay attention, ask the uncomfortable questions, be willing to be wrong if it means you might be right, because somewhere in your career, you will encounter someone like Amy, someone who desperately needs an advocate but can't ask for help, and your willingness to pay attention might be the only thing standing between them and continued suffering. After the ceremony, several new graduates approached Rebecca. One young woman, tears in her eyes, said, "My sister was in an abusive relationship. I didn't know until it was almost too late. Your story, Amy's story, it's making me realize I missed so many signs. I want to be the kind of nurse who doesn't miss them." "You will be," Rebecca said gently, "because you're aware, because you're thinking about it, because you care. That's where it starts." Amy herself approached last. "I want you to meet someone," she said, gesturing to an older woman beside her. "This is Professor Morrison. She teaches social work at my university. I told her about you, and she wants to collaborate on a training program for social workers and medical professionals, teaching them to work together on abuse cases." Rebecca smiled. "I'd be honored." The collaboration resulted in an interdisciplinary program that brought together nurses, doctors, social workers, police officers, and child advocates. They learned each other's roles, practiced coordinated responses to abuse cases, and developed protocols for better communication across systems. The program, called the Amy Reynolds Initiative, spread to other states. It became a model for how different professions could work together to protect vulnerable people. 5 years after Amy's case, Rebecca was invited to testify before the Colorado State Legislature about proposed changes to mandatory reporting laws. Current law requires medical professionals to report suspected abuse, Rebecca explained to the Legislative Committee, but it doesn't provide clear guidelines on what constitutes reasonable suspicion, and it doesn't protect reporters from retaliation or lawsuits when their reports turn out to be incorrect. She detailed the barriers that prevented medical professionals from reporting suspicious cases: fear of being wrong, fear of lawsuits, fear of damaging relationships with patients, uncertainty about what threshold of evidence was needed. "When I reported Amy Reynolds's case, I was taking a risk," Rebecca said. "Her father was a prominent attorney who could have destroyed my career if he'd chosen to. I was fortunate. The evidence supported my suspicions. But many medical professionals face cases where the signs are less clear, and they're paralyzed by uncertainty." She proposed specific legislative changes, clearer definitions of reportable suspicions, legal protection for good faith reporters, even when investigations didn't confirm abuse, mandatory training for all medical professionals on abuse recognition, and better coordination between hospitals and child protective services. One legislator asked, "Ms. Martinez, aren't you concerned that broader reporting requirements will lead to more false reports, that will overwhelm the system with unfounded cases?" Rebecca had anticipated this question. "Senator, in Amy Reynolds's case, she came to the ER 4 times with injuries consistent with abuse. 4 times, medical professionals treated her and sent her back to her abuser. The system failed her not because of too much reporting, but because of too little attention." She pulled up statistics on her presentation screen. "Research shows that only about 4% of child abuse reports are deliberately false. Another 8 to 10% are made in good faith but turn out to be unfounded after investigation. That means 85–88% of reports are either confirmed or have enough concern to warrant protective services involvement." Rebecca looked directly at the skeptical senator. "The question isn't whether we'll have some unfounded reports. We will. The question is whether we're willing to accept those false positives to catch the real cases. And I'm telling you, as someone who has seen what happens when we don't report, the answer has to be yes." The legislation passed. It included broader protections for mandated reporters, clearer guidelines on what constituted reportable suspicions, and funding for enhanced training programs. Within a year, Colorado saw a 34% increase in abuse reports from medical professionals. But critically, the rate of substantiated cases also increased, indicating that medical professionals were getting better at recognizing genuine abuse, not just reporting more indiscriminately. Amy's story reached beyond Colorado, beyond the United States.
Rebecca began receiving invitations to speak internationally about abuse recognition and medical advocacy. In London, she trained NHS staff on identifying abuse patterns. In Sydney, she worked with Australian hospital systems to develop better reporting protocols. In Toronto, she collaborated with Canadian child welfare organizations on interdisciplinary response teams. Each country had different laws, different cultural contexts, different challenges. But the underlying principle remained the same. Medical professionals had to be willing to see what others missed and act on what they saw. At a conference in Amsterdam, a doctor from Germany approached Rebecca with tears in her eyes. "I had a patient 3 years ago," the doctor said. "A woman with injuries that didn't quite fit her story. I suspected domestic violence, but she denied it. Her husband was so charming. I let it go. She died 6 months later. He killed her." The doctor's voice broke. "I live with that every day. I knew something was wrong and I didn't push. I didn't report. I let my discomfort override my duty to protect her. Your story, Amy's story, it's teaching me and others that we can't make that mistake again." Rebecca hugged her, this stranger across an ocean, who carried the same burden of knowing that inaction could be fatal. "You can't save everyone," Rebecca said gently. "But you can decide that from now on you'll always ask the hard questions. You can decide that your discomfort is worth less than someone's safety. That's how we honor the ones we couldn't save." The doctor nodded, wiping her eyes. "I've implemented new protocols in my hospital, mandatory screening for all trauma cases, better documentation, closer coordination with police. I'm trying to make sure no one else slips through the way she did. That's all we can do," Rebecca said. "Learn, improve, make sure the next person gets the help the previous one didn't." 7 years after that night in the ER, Rebecca received an invitation that made her cry. Amy Reynolds was graduating from university with her degree in social work. She wanted Rebecca there. Rebecca flew to California for the ceremony. She watched Amy walk across the stage, confident, healthy, transformed from the terrified 16-year-old she'd met in the ER into a strong, capable young woman ready to help others. At the reception afterward, Amy introduced Rebecca to her mother, her professors, her friends, her whole support system that had helped her rebuild her life. "I want to show you something," Amy said, pulling out her phone. She showed Rebecca a photo of a small tattoo on her wrist, right over the scar from where Marcus had broken it. The tattoo was a simple phrase, "Someone saw me. I got it last year," Amy explained, "as a reminder that I was invisible for so long, trapped in abuse that everyone around me failed to notice. But you saw me, Rebecca. You looked at me and saw past the lies and the fear, and you refused to let me disappear." Amy's voice grew passionate. "I'm going to be a social worker because I want to be that person for others. I want to be someone who sees the invisible people, who pays attention when everyone else looks away, who refuses to accept easy explanations when something feels wrong." She gestured around the reception, her mother, her friends, her professors. "I have all of this because you made one choice 7 years ago to trust your instincts. You didn't just save my life that night. You gave me a future, and now I'm going to spend that future making sure other people get the same chance." Rebecca couldn't speak through her tears. She just hugged Amy tightly, this young woman who embodied both the worst and best of humanity, the capacity for cruelty and the capacity for healing when someone cares enough to intervene. Later, Catherine Reynolds pulled Rebecca aside. "I owe you a debt I can never repay," she said. "You gave me my daughter back, but more than that, you gave her back to herself. She's not defined by what happened to her anymore. She's defined by what she's going to do with her life." "She did that herself," Rebecca said. "I just opened the door. She's the one who walked through it and built something beautiful on the other side. But she couldn't have done it without you opening that door," Catherine insisted. "Without you asking the questions everyone else was too polite, or too busy, or too believing of Marcus to ask. Without you trusting her enough to report what she told you. You were the difference between her life and her death. Never doubt that." 10 years after Amy's case, Rebecca was training the next generation of nurses at the same hospital where she'd met Amy. She was now the director of patient advocacy, a position created specifically to ensure that cases like Amy's didn't slip through the cracks. One of her nursing students, a young woman named Maria, approached her after class. "Miss Martinez, I had a patient today who reminded me of the Amy Reynolds case you talk about. A teenage girl with injuries that didn't match her story. Her stepfather was with her, and something felt wrong. But I didn't know what to do." "What did you do?" Rebecca asked. "I documented everything thoroughly. I asked her if she felt safe at home. She said yes. I wanted to report it, but my supervising nurse said without more evidence we'd be overstepping. So I let it go, but it's been bothering me all day." Rebecca felt a familiar frustration. Despite all the training, all the protocols, all the changes, there were still barriers. Still people who prioritized avoiding conflict over protecting patients. "Tell me everything you observed," Rebecca said. Maria detailed the case. A 15-year-old with a black eye and defensive wounds on her forearms. The story was that she'd fallen off her bike, but the injuries didn't match a bike fall. The girl was withdrawn. Her stepfather was controlling and wouldn't let Maria talk to her alone. "You're right to be concerned," Rebecca said. "Here's what we're going to do. We're going to pull her records and see if there's a pattern. We're going to document your concerns in detail, and we're going to file a report with CPS. Your supervising nurse was wrong. We don't need conclusive evidence to report. We need reasonable suspicion, and you have that. But what if I'm wrong? Maria asked. Then you're wrong, and CPS will close the case after investigation, Rebecca said. But Maria, what if you're right and you do nothing? Can you live with that? Maria shook her head. No, I can't. Then trust your instincts. Trust what you saw. Trust that the system, imperfect as it is, will investigate appropriately. And trust that being wrong is better than staying silent when someone might be in danger. They filed the report together. The investigation confirmed Maria's suspicions. The girl was being abused by her stepfather. She was removed from the home and placed with relatives. The stepfather was arrested. You saved her, Rebecca told Maria afterward. We saved her, Maria corrected. You taught me to trust my instincts. You showed me that asking uncomfortable questions is part of the job. You gave me permission to be wrong if it meant protecting someone. Maria paused. I want to do what you do. Not just treat patients, but advocate for them. Train others to see what I saw today. Be the person who asks the questions everyone else is too polite to ask. Rebecca smiled. Then that's what you'll do. And when you do, you'll be continuing what Amy Reynolds started, what I tried to build on, what countless others are now carrying forward, the work of paying attention, of caring when it's uncomfortable, of refusing to let vulnerable people disappear. 12 years after that night with Amy Reynolds, Rebecca found herself back in the same ER bay where she'd first treated Amy. It had been renovated since then. New equipment, fresh paint, updated technology, but the essence was the same. She thought about that night often. How close Amy had come to being just another case, treated and released, sent back to her abuser. How a combination of instinct, training, and willingness to be uncomfortable had made the difference. She thought about all the other Amys over the years, the ones she'd helped, the ones she'd missed, the ones she'd caught just in time, the ones who had slipped through despite her best efforts. Not every case had a happy ending. Not every suspicion was confirmed. Not every report led to rescue. But enough did. Enough lives were saved. Enough futures were protected. Enough people were given the chance to heal that Rebecca knew her choice to trust her instincts had been right. Her phone buzzed. A text from Amy, who was now a social worker in Los Angeles, working with abuse victims. Just wanted you to know, I helped a girl today who reminded me of myself at 16. Scared, hurt, convinced no one would believe her. But I believed her, and we got her to safety. Thank you for teaching me that paying attention saves lives. I'm passing it forward. Rebecca smiled through tears. This was the real impact of that night 12 years ago. Not just one life saved, but a ripple effect of awareness, of advocacy, of people who refused to look away. She thought about all the medical professionals she'd trained over the years, the thousands of nurses and doctors and social workers who had heard Amy's story and decided to trust their instincts more, to ask harder questions, to prioritize patient safety over their own comfort. She thought about the legislators who had strengthened reporting laws, the hospitals that had implemented better protocols, the communities that had developed coordinated response systems, all because one nurse had refused to accept a convenient lie 12 years ago. Rebecca pulled up her computer and began writing. Not a medical report this time, but something more personal, a reflection on 12 years of advocacy, of fighting for vulnerable people, of teaching others to see what she'd learned to see. Rebecca titled her reflection, Someone Saw Me, 12 years after Amy Reynolds. She posted it on her professional blog, not knowing if anyone would read it, but needing to say it anyway. 12 years ago, a 16-year-old girl came into my ER with injuries that didn't match her story. I could have accepted the explanation. I could have treated her and moved on to the next patient. I could have told myself it wasn't my business. But something stopped me. Call it instinct. Call it training. Call it the unwillingness to ignore what I was seeing. I asked uncomfortable questions. I reported my suspicions. That choice changed 2 lives. Amy was saved from ongoing abuse, and I discovered my true calling, not just treating injuries, but protecting the vulnerable people behind those injuries. In the 12 years since, I've trained thousands of medical professionals. I've helped implement new protocols in hospitals across the country. I've worked with legislators to strengthen protective laws. I've advocated for countless patients who couldn't advocate for themselves. But the work is never done. Right now, somewhere, there's another Amy, another person suffering abuse that everyone around them is missing or dismissing. Another victim waiting for someone to pay attention. Maybe that someone is you. If you're a medical professional, a teacher, a counselor, a neighbor, anyone who interacts with people, I'm asking you to pay attention. Really pay attention. Not just to what people say, but to what they can't say. Not just to the obvious injuries, but to the patterns, the inconsistencies, the fear hiding behind forced smiles. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Ask the uncomfortable questions. Report your concerns even when you're not sure. Be willing to be wrong if it means you might be right. Your discomfort is temporary. Someone's suffering might be permanent if you do nothing. Amy Reynolds is thriving now. She's a social worker, helping other abuse victims. She's strong, healthy, building a beautiful life. But she almost didn't get that chance. She almost disappeared into a system that failed to see her. She survived because one nurse paid attention. That's all it took. One person willing to look beyond the surface, to question the convenient explanation, to advocate for someone who couldn't advocate for herself. You have that same power. Every single day you have opportunities to be the person who sees what others miss, who asks what others won't, who acts when others stay silent. Use that power. Trust it. Don't let the next Amy slip through the cracks because you were too polite, too busy, too uncertain to speak up. Because somewhere, right now, someone is suffering in silence, and the person who can save them might be you. Pay attention. Ask questions. Report concerns. Advocate fiercely. Be the someone who sees. Rebecca posted the reflection and closed her laptop. She didn't know if it would matter. Didn't know if anyone would read it, much less act on it. But 2 days later, she received an email from a school counselor in Maine. I read your blog post. Yesterday, a student came to my office with bruises she said were from sports. Something felt off. Usually I would have accepted her explanation. She's on the basketball team. Injuries happen. But your post made me ask deeper questions. She broke down and admitted her father had been hitting her. I reported it immediately. She's in protective custody now. Thank you for reminding me to trust my instincts. You saved another life even from hundreds of miles away. Then another email from a doctor in Texas who had reported suspected elder abuse after reading Rebecca's post. Another from a therapist in Oregon who had recognized signs of domestic violence she might have missed. Another from a nurse in Florida who had advocated for a patient despite pressure to avoid making waves. The ripples kept spreading. One nurse's choice, 12 years ago. One patient's survival. One story shared. Thousands of lives touched. Countless futures changed. 15 years after that night in the ER, Rebecca Martinez retired from active nursing. She was 50 years old, had spent 30 years in the profession, and had made more of an impact than most people achieve in multiple lifetimes. At her retirement party, surrounded by colleagues, former students, and the countless people she'd helped over the years, Rebecca felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Amy Reynolds, now 31, confident, radiant, accompanied by a woman and 2 young children. "Rebecca," Amy said, her voice thick with emotion, "I wanted you to meet my family. This is my wife, Sarah, and these are my children, Rebecca and Marcus." Rebecca felt tears spring to her eyes. "You named your daughter after me?" "Of course," Amy said. "You gave me my life. I wanted my daughter to have the name of the woman who made her existence possible." She gestured to her son. "And Marcus, I named him after my father, not to honor him, but to reclaim the name, to say that the name Marcus Reynolds can mean something good, something strong, something that survives trauma and builds beauty on the other side." Amy's children, 6 and 4 years old, looked up at Rebecca with curious eyes. "Are you the lady who saved Mommy?" Little Rebecca asked. "Your mommy saved herself," Rebecca said gently, kneeling down. "I just gave her a chance to do it." "Mommy says you're a hero," young Marcus said seriously. "She says you pay attention when other people don't. I want to be like that when I grow up." Rebecca looked at Amy, who was crying now. "You're raising them right." "I'm raising them to see people," Amy said, "to pay attention, to care when it's uncomfortable, to never look away from someone who needs help. I'm raising them with the values you taught me 15 years ago, that noticing matters, that action matters, that one person can change everything." She pulled Rebecca into a tight hug. "You changed everything for me. You changed everything for my wife, who wouldn't have me if I hadn't survived. You changed everything for my children, who wouldn't exist. You changed everything for the dozens of people I've helped as a social worker." The ripples never stop, Rebecca. They never stop. As Rebecca looked around the room at former students now training others, at colleagues implementing her protocols, at Amy and her beautiful family, she understood the true measure of her career. It wasn't the number of patients she'd treated. It wasn't the awards or recognition. It wasn't even the laws that had been changed, or the systems that had been improved. It was the lives, the actual breathing, thriving lives that existed because she'd made one choice 15 years ago, to trust her instincts, and refuse to look away. Amy Reynolds was alive. Her children existed. The dozens of people Amy had helped as a social worker were safe. The thousands of medical professionals Rebecca had trained were paying attention. The countless patients who had been protected because someone asked the right questions at the right time. All of it connected, all of it rippling out from one night, one patient, one nurse who gave a damn. Rebecca raised her glass for the toast her colleagues insisted on making. But as they celebrated her career, her achievements, her impact, she was thinking about something else. She was thinking about the next nurse, somewhere right now, treating a patient with injuries that don't quite match the story. The next teacher, noticing bruises that don't make sense. The next counselor, hearing a story that feels rehearsed. The next person standing at the crossroads between convenience and courage. And she was hoping, praying that they would make the same choice she'd made 15 years ago, to pay attention, to ask questions, to trust their instincts, to refuse to look away. Because somewhere, right now, another Amy was waiting. Another life was hanging in the balance. Another future depended on someone caring enough to see what everyone else was missing. That was the real legacy. Not what Rebecca had done, but what she'd inspired others to do. Not the lives she'd saved personally, but the culture of awareness and advocacy she'd helped create. As the party continued around her, Rebecca looked at little Rebecca Reynolds, 6 years old, bright-eyed, full of potential, and made a silent promise. I'll keep teaching, keep training, keep sharing Amy's story, and all the other stories. Keep reminding people that paying attention saves lives. Keep inspiring the next generation to trust their instincts and act on what they see, because you deserve a world where people like your mother are seen, where suffering isn't invisible, where someone always gives a damn. That's my legacy. Not what I did, but what others will do, because I showed them it was possible. One choice, one moment, one person at a time. That's how we change the world. This story is dedicated to every medical professional, teacher, counselor, and everyday person who has ever trusted their instincts and reported suspected abuse. Your courage saves lives. Your willingness to be uncomfortable protects the vulnerable. Your refusal to look away makes the difference between survival and tragedy. Thank you for paying attention.
Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.